Preface. This book is all about the importance of skills, which are not so talked about. But they play a very significant role in our success. Skills are the expertise or talent needed to do a task effectively. Simply put, you require skill to do anything and everything. Currently, you are reading this book because of the skill of reading. You went to market driving the car, thus, you exhibited driving skill. In the market, while buying stuff, you compared two products. This means you displayed your evaluation and decision-making. Skill, good or bad. Therefore, skill is something which is very common and seems ordinary. Still, it plays an extraordinary role in our life as skill determines our salary or earning, respect, and position in society. Have you ever wondered why people who have an MBA education from Ivy League schools get paid more? These colleges are known to develop skills, which are required to grow the business of the corporation. Skills help us to succeed in life. The best thing about a skill is that it can be acquired. That is why, immediately after an ordinary college degree, and despite not having many skills, people still get a job. It is because employers believe that if the attitude is right, the skill can be developed in their employees. Through various anecdotes, I have tried to prove the importance of some necessary skills, which we generally tend to ignore. I am not trying to say that we don't believe in those skills, but having these skills are so common that enough attention is not paid to them. Hence, I have concluded that these are ignored skills. To convince you about the importance of these skills, I have cited many examples of the ancient and contemporary world. Most of the cases, they are in the form of short stories to make things interesting. Of course, the purpose of this book is to share knowledge about life skills and social skills. Now the question arises, despite knowing that skills are essential and that they help us in our lives, why do we ignore some of them? To arrive at an answer, let me ask you, isn't it true that our weakness is not visible to us? You know very well that you can become a better person by removing your weaknesses, but you still do not identify it yourself. For example, those who are overweight know its consequences, but still do not act to achieve fitness. Obviously, they ignore the problem. The same way, it's natural that something that is very obvious skips from our mind, or we keep procrastinating. The 9 ignored skills or concepts, which are covered in this book, are 1. Power of observation. 2. Power of connecting the dots. 3. Power of communication. 4. Power of a purpose. 5. Power of dreams. 6. Power of out-of-the-box thinking. 7. Power of perseverance. 8. Power of deep dive. 9. Power of prediction. I am sure you have heard each of these skills. Before reading this book, just ask yourself, have you actively tried to improve these skills? If yes, then I presume you are in the top or middle management of a company. If not, you are trying to jump into middle management. While writing this book, I have chosen a different kind of skills to cover varied aspects, and therefore, created more opportunities for sharing various stories and examples. There are more than 50 short stories in this book, making things simple and interesting. Enjoy reading. Chapter 1. Power of observation. People's minds are changed through observation and not through argument. Will Rogers. Observation is an action or a process of carefully watching someone or something. Observation is simply a way of understanding the world we live in. But is it really simple to observe? What makes a few of us more observant and, on the contrary, why do others simply ignore or fail to register events around them? Whenever someone from another organization visits your company and presents their proposal or expertise, aren't you trying to observe their body language, dressing sense, communication and behavior, confidence level, way of content delivery, and quality of content? All these observations help you form a perception about the visiting person and his organization. Whether you observe actively or passively, your observation skill helps you in your personal and professional life. Our brain is always at work. It keeps observing things. You may never pay attention, but somehow subconsciously your brain registers events, analyses, and decides actions or reactions. For instance, while driving, you pay attention to ensure that no one is crossing the road or coming in front of your car. Similarly, you automatically apply brakes while nearing a hairpin bend. This happens because your brain observes, assesses and processes the information it is fed through your eyes or ears, and then takes the appropriate decision without you having to intervene. Now, let's digress a bit from the present to the past to understand how Observation skill has helped the humankind. Have you ever thought about why Homo sapiens, humans, are the superior species that ever walked on Earth? Why are humans ruling the land despite being inferior to other animals in terms of physical strength, speed, and agility? A human child cannot survive for years without help from parents, whereas a 3-month-old kitten can independently manage its life. A human child takes almost a year, even to stand on its feet and walk, but we see how a newborn calf manages to stand on its feet and starts floundering when it is just a few days old. Imagine a fully grown adult, lest a child, to fight with a 2-year-old lion. Whom do you think is likely to win? The answer is obvious, but I'll leave it to you to decide. Let us come back to the critical question: why are Homo sapiens the superior species? The human race has evolved from a cave-dwelling troglodyte to today's modern humans capable of making space stations. Thanks to the ability to think and transfer knowledge through generations, it has helped humans reach the pinnacle of success. Now, before knowledge transfer, it's essential to gain knowledge. Humans gain knowledge through observing the happening around them or through someone else's experiences. Thus, the key to this evolution is the ability to observe and then critically think about it. The observation then led to knowledge. The knowledge of a human transferred to fellow humans. This transfer of learning became a possibility through communication. Long before the invention of scripts, how do you think information or learning passed through generations? It was through verbal communication and memorizing it. Ancient Indian religious and scientific learnings from Vedas passed through generations via listening, shruti, and memorizing, smriti. This tradition is still in practice in many folds of religious education. Therefore, observation worked as a building block of knowledge. If we study ancient civilizations of Egypt, Central Asia, Latin America, Indus Valley, and later Vedic period, we see that thousands of years ago, wise men researched medical science, astrology, and mathematics, and wrote a treatise. With their observation, generation after generation, people studied, documented, and improved the repository. All these happened because of observation-led learnings. Malcolm Gladwell, in his brilliantly written book, Blink, has explained the importance of the phenomenon called thin slicing. He argues that the human brain can process a small amount of information, a thin slice, and draw incredible conclusions. This is made possible through a repository of data in our mind, which is accumulated through years of observation. Today, we have powerful telescopes and satellites to help scientists calculate the precise date and time of the next eclipse or any other terrestrial phenomenon. You ever wondered how thousands of years ago, Egyptians were able to forecast next eclipse with precision? Now we have scientific evidence that many ancient civilizations knew about planetary movements, solar system, and position of stars. They did this without even having any advanced machinery back in those days. Imagine the tedious task of noting the daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly variation in the position of planetary objects and analyzing them to predict the next planetary phenomenon accurately. This extraordinary feat was possible because of years of minute observation. Evidently, the knowledge we have today is an outcome of continuous learning, which was saved and communicated throughout human history. Thus, the power of observation and the ability to communicate has helped humans conquer the world. In further sections of the chapters, we will go through evidence of the power of observation. 1.1 An apple can change everything. 3 centuries ago, a man was enjoying the English summer under the shade of an apple tree. Apples were ripe and were falling here and there. The man observed the apples fall and wondered, why are the apples falling down? Falling of apple was not a unique phenomenon, but he reasoned with himself, why does an apple fall on the ground? Why downward, instead of falling sideways, or going straight into the sky? Indeed, the question was quite silly, but eventually, this man's observation of this inconsequential event led him to bring the theory of gravity in the year 1667. He went on to become a great scientist, Sir Isaac Newton. Isn't it amazing that observation of even obvious things can be very radical, or open new doors that seem non-existent to the most? Let us take a coffee break, not in literal terms, but to understand how observation and actions can revolutionize how we all drink coffee today. 1.2 Coffee and count of the filter cone. If we list the best gifts from the USA to the world, then in all possibility, it will be blue jeans, rock and roll, and coffee. However, many do not know, coffee got a slow start in the US, and a revolt against the British King George III in 1773 led to the coffee revolution. Boston Party was the reason behind the mass switch from tea to coffee in the US. Fast forward 200 years from that event in the early 70s, premium coffee shops were gaining popularity in the United States. To tap the growing market demand, an ambitious entrepreneur opened a new coffee shop in Seattle in 1971. The new brand gained popularity among masses and was on course to become what it is now. Nevertheless, there was a twist. This coffee shop chain procured plastic cone filters from a company called Hammerplast. One day, Howard Schultz, general manager of Hammerplast, inspecting through the sales records, observed an interesting trend. He found that a small coffee shop chain in Seattle is buying an abnormally high number of plastic cone filters. Interested and fascinated with this kind of sales, Howard decided to pay a visit. During his visit to the coffee shop, he found nothing unusual. It was a typical coffee shop just like any other. He asked for a coffee, and this is where he found the difference. Two things pleasantly surprised him: knowledge of employees about coffee, and second, their customer service. He observed that none of the staff were rushing, they each talked calmly, discussed coffee tastes, and made suggestions to consumers based on their taste needs. Additionally, the ambience allowed customers to sit and sip while talking to friends and families. Howard Schultz was so impressed that he joined this coffee shop chain as the marketing director. After some time, after a few years of working there, he had a difference of opinion with the coffee shop owner and resigned. Somehow, he was so fascinated that he managed to acquire that coffee shop chain later on. Today the turnover of this coffee chain is over $20 billion United States dollars and has footprint worldwide. This coffee chain market capitalization made Howard Schultz one of the wealthiest people in the world. Any guesses? Yes, you are right. It is Starbucks. If there was a single most crucial thing which Howard did right in his lifetime, it is that he observed. He used the power of his observation to unfold the possibilities of future, unbox something extraordinary, and so did Newton. In the earlier story, do you use the power of observation? Yes, no, or maybe. Your answer can be anything, but let me tell you that you are using the power of observation every day, without realizing or thinking about it. Previously in the chapter, I mentioned the connection between observation and humankind. Let us explore more about it. 1.3 Role of observation in human life. The most common and straightforward method for getting information about everything around us is to observe. Hence, observation acts as a fundamental and the primary way of getting information about anything. However, it must be kept in the mind that observation is not just seeing things, but it is all about carefully examining those things and to make a sensible judgment about them. Improving observation skills allows you to listen with more than just your ears and make better decisions and perceptions. It also enhances the ability to interact with others and to respond appropriately. Both are key to success in professional and personal life. In the workplace, a good employee listens well and is aware of what is happening around him. Observation is an integral part of learning. Theoretically, the most common form of learning is observational learning. Observational learning describes learning through watching others, retaining the information, and then later replicating the observed behaviors. There are several other learning theories, such as classical conditioning and operant conditioning. These theories help emphasize how direct experience, reinforcement, or punishment leads to learning by individuals. However, one may argue that a great deal of learning happens indirectly. For example, imagine how a kid watches his parents waving at each other, and then imitates these actions. Kids learn through this process of watching and imitating others. In psychology, this is known as observational learning. Observational learning continues throughout one's life, but it tends to be the most common during childhood, as children learn from elders and society. Observation also plays an essential role in the socialization process. Children often learn how to behave and respond to others by observing how their parents interact with each other and other people. That's why parents need to act a certain way, so children do not learn bad manners. That's why, in popular culture, people judge parents based on their children's behavior. Famous Canadian-American psychologist, Albert Bandura, spent his life researching learning through observation. Through experiments, he demonstrated that we are naturally inclined to engage in observational learning. Children as young as just 21 days old have shown to imitate facial expressions and mouth movements. Isn't it amazing? In his famous Bobo doll experiment in 1961, Bandura demonstrated that young children would imitate an adult model's violent actions. In the experiment, children were shown a film in which an adult repeatedly hit a giant, inflatable balloon doll. After viewing the film clip, children were allowed to play with a real Bobo doll, just like the one they saw in the film. The research proved that the children who had seen violent behavior in the film clip were violent with Bobo doll, as opposed to other kids who had not seen the film clip. This proves the point that children's behavior largely depends on the culture surrounding them. This research raises the question on the impact of violent movies, television programs, and video games on children. Psychologists Craig Anderson and Karen Dill established the link between video game violence and aggressive behavior. Through the experiment, they proved students who played a violent video game behaved more aggressively than those who had not played violent games. Later on, the American Psychological Association concluded that exposure to violent interactive video games increased aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. All these researches prove the fact that observational learning is prevalent in children. We Indians are fond of cricket, hence, let me take you through the example of cricket. 1.4 Being observant, you will enjoy more. It was March 16, 2012, Sachin Tendulkar was batting, and Dale Steyn was bowling. The third ball of the 7th over, Dale Steyn bowled, and Sachin Tendulkar played beautiful cover drive. The whole stadium erupted with joy. Those who were watching the match on TV sets also started clapping. Millions watched the shot and enjoyed it. Only a few people observed the entire proceeding. For them, it was like Dale Steyn bowled over pitch and swing ball, just outside the off stump. Sachin Tendulkar read the ball before the ball landed on the pitch, and took out his left foot, reached the ball, and punched it with great timing, keeping the face of the bat closed, so that shot remained grounded, and piercing the fielder standing at mid-off and covers. Sachin's toe was in the direction of the shot, which he played. The next day, those who had observed how Sachin played the cover drive shot were able to perform a similar cover drive. They were able to imitate because they had observed and learnt. At the same time, those who just watched Sachin's shot blamed the pitch for not being able to play a similar cover drive themselves. Thus, those who observed closely learnt much more than others who just watched. Observation helps us learn faster and better. It is a painful and time-consuming process, but is a sure-shot recipe of winning. You will enjoy this more if you know the proceedings well. Observation is the best way to understand them. Now the question arises, why some of us are more observant than others? It largely depends on the natural flair of curiosity. Let us understand this in detail. 1.5 How does curiosity and observation help in the decision-making process? Curiosity means a strong desire to know or learn about something. A curious observation is a first and essential step in the decision-making process. A curious person does not accept anything easily. He always has skepticism towards everything which he sees and hears. The curious people always ask questions, i.e., try to challenge the status quo, and search for their answer. Being curious can help you know more, and in making proper decisions. This can give you an edge over others. When you are curious, you identify the situations in which decisions have to be made on the spot or in the future. The curiosity generally stimulates other processes that help you in decision-making, like questioning, comparing, inquiring about things, experimentation, visualization, skepticism, categorization, identification of different patterns, imaginative thought, evaluation, logical reasoning, prediction, inference, etc. All these processes will lead you towards suitable decisions. Observation helps in the ability to notice important things to gather information. No doubt, if you are observant, then you can become a good decision maker. With curious observation, you can make your decision process easy and effective. During the decision-making process, do not stop your thinking process and think about the problem repeatedly. Think and visualize the whole scenario in your mind to predict the outcome of your decision. Curiosity during the decision-making process leads to dissatisfaction, i.e., you Do not get content with the decision, and in the end, dissatisfaction leads towards improvement in decision-making abilities. Therefore, the more curious we are, the more we will observe, and thus, our decision-making ability would be better. Good observation skill helps in overcoming statistical bias. Let's understand this through an example of the mythological world. 1.6 Observation is above statistics. As per Hindu mythology, Narad Muni is one of the most prominent devotees of Lord Vishnu. He used to chant, Narayan Narayan, the other name of Lord Vishnu, with every breath. One day, he went to Lord Vishnu and asked, My Lord, who is your biggest devotee? Narad Muni was quite sure that Lord Vishnu would take his name. Lord Vishnu said, My biggest devotee is a poor farmer on earth. Narad Muni was quite surprised and disturbed. He immediately decided to go and see this farmer. He had divine power, which he used to become invisible, reach near that farmer, and noticed that the farmer chanted, Narayan Narayan, only twice in 24 hours. The farmer was occupied in agriculture, feeding cows and buffaloes, cutting wood for cooking food, etc. Narad Muni went back to Lord Vishnu and said, My Lord, there seems to be an error in your judgment. The farmer chanted, Narayan Narayan, only twice, while I chant almost 1,000 times in a day. Therefore, statistically, I should be the winner, so please let me know how this farmer can be your biggest devotee. Lord Vishnu smiled and told him that all the queries would be answered, but he has to do a critical task for him before that. Narad Muni said, My Lord, I am always in your duty. Please let me know what I need to do. Lord Vishnu gave Narad Muni a small diya lamp, which was lit. Lord Vishnu said, Oh dear, you have to go around the earth and come back within 24 hours, just keep in mind that the diya must not get off. Narad Muni had the divine power of flying, hence, he was very confident that he would successfully perform the task. As soon as he left the place with the diya, he realized that it's not so easy to keep it lit, as the wind was a threat to blowing it off. He somehow covered the diya, and suddenly a storm came. Narad Muni had an uphill task to keep the lamp lit, and somehow, he crossed that area. He was feeling tired and thirsty, but he was worried that if he stops, he might not reach Lord Vishnu within 24 hours, hence, he continued to fly. Next, there was heavy rain. Again, he was in deep problem. With a lot of effort, he managed to cross that area also. Finally, with great effort and pain, he reached to Lord Vishnu's abode and claimed that he managed to complete the task successfully, within 24 hours. Lord Vishnu said, Indeed, you have completed the task within 24 hours, and ensured that diya is lit, so no doubt you are successful in your task, but now tell me how many times you have chanted Narayan Narayan in last 24 hours? Narad Muni realized that not even a single time he chanted Narayan Narayan in the task period. Narad Muni said, O Lord, I was so busy performing the task that I missed out chanting your name. Lord Vishnu said, Dear Narad, imagine the poor farmer is also performing the task which is equally difficult. Still, he is managing to chant my name twice a day. Now tell me, isn't he is my biggest devotee? Narad Muni humbly accepted this fact. The moral of the story is, if you go by pure statistics, you can commit mistakes. You have to observe all the facts around the statistics to reach a correct conclusion. Does observation help in our studies? Let's understand it from the story below. 1.7 Observation and Study. Louis Agassiz, the famous Swiss biologist cum professor at Harvard, had a unique way of teaching. He was master of in-depth comparison and holds a distinguished position in the studies of life science and zoological education. Once, he placed a fish specimen on the table in front of one of his post-graduate students and asked him to find out more about the fish, without causing any harm. Louis Agassiz then left the class for some other reason. The student watched the fish for some time and casually wrote for almost an hour, until he felt confident that he knew all there was to know about that fish. The student got frustrated that his professor had not turned up that day. And similarly, the professor didn't come for the next few days. Eventually, the student realized Agassiz's plan. The professor wanted him to observe the fish more deeply. After few days of study, the student finally began to notice finer details. That had escaped his vision previously, like how the scales of the fish were shaped, and the patterns they made, how the color of fish differs on different parts, the placement of the teeth, shape of each tooth, and so on. When his professor finally returned, and the student explained all that he had learnt, Agassiz replied, "I am not happy with the findings," and walked out of the room. The student got disappointed that the professor had discarded all his efforts, but he gathered the courage to further try. He sidelined all his previous notes to start afresh. He studied the fish for many hours per day for an entire week. When he met with the professor the next time, the student had produced work, which was a milestone in studying that species of fish. After his investigation of the sunfish, the student wrote, "I had learnt the art of comparing objects based on a naturalist's work." Professor Agassiz is fondly remembered as the best professor, after Greek philosopher Socrates, as his legacy continued with his students becoming famous professors and distinguished scholars. Do you know, observation skill has helped many discoveries? Let's find them out. 1.8 Role of observation in scientific discovery. To acquire knowledge, one must study. But to acquire wisdom, one must observe. Marilyn Vos Savon. Invariably every scientific investigation begins with an observation. In his famous book, A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking noted, "Good scientific theories must be built on a large class of observations. Observations are the basis of scientific theories. Creativity usually begins by observing the situation and paying close attention to how problems and challenges are being solved. In the case of product innovation, existing systems, products, or natural occurrences can be applied to a new challenge." 1.9 How did Edward Jenner invent the smallpox vaccine? In the middle of the 18th century, smallpox was a deadly disease of humans. It killed about 1/3 of those infected. Survivors often bore scars on their faces and other parts of the body. It was a leading cause of blindness back then. Thus, it was a big challenge for physicians and scientists to find the solution to this deadly disease. British physician, Edward Jenner, was born in 1749. Jenner proved that infection with cowpox could protect a person from smallpox infection. Cowpox was a cattle disease, which used to transfer to humans, but it was not so deadly and harmful. While Jenner was talking to his milkmaid, she claimed that she would never have smallpox because she has had cowpox. Similarly, he observed that many other dairy workers also believed that cowpox infection protected them from smallpox. Jenner was astonished to know this kind of belief in dairy workers and decided to deep dive into this belief, and thus decided to experiment with the son of his gardener. He scratched something from a cowpox sore on a milkmaid's hand into the arm of an 8-year-old boy, Phipps. The boy got ill, but was fine after a few days, i.e. recovered from cowpox. After a few weeks, Jenner took out some matter from a fresh human smallpox sore and put on Phipps's arm, with the idea to make him ill with smallpox. Phipps, however, did not contract smallpox. Jenner replicated the same experiments with other humans and published his findings in a leading journal. Jenner got success in creating a vaccine against smallpox, which helped eradicate this disease from the world. Thanks to the mass vaccination program globally, the World Health Organization eventually declared smallpox eradicated from the planet in 1980. 1.10 Benjamin Franklin and his observations. In the mid-18th century, most people believed that wet clothing and dampness in the air caused the common cold. However, Benjamin Franklin observed that sailors, who were continually wearing wet clothing, were not suffering from cold. Thus, something was wrong in their belief about the common cold. After analyzing for some time, he eventually concluded that people often catch a cold from one another when sitting near and breathing in each other's transpiration. Before the knowledge of viruses and germs, Franklin had figured out that the common cold passed between people through the air. Therefore, by observing wet sailors, he convinced the world that something is transmitting between people, causing the common cold. It was a big revelation, and this led to microbiology research and medicine of cold. Benjamin's role in electricity. People were aware of electricity in the mid-18th century, but not how we know about it today. Back then, people used electricity for magic tricks, by creating sparks and shocks to amaze people. Scientists were experimenting for centuries, but could not get much success, hence, there was no practical use of electricity. Benjamin, a curious and inventive thinker, studied electricity in detail and came up with his hypothesis. Franklin observed several similarities between electricity and lightning as they both created light, made a loud noise when they exploded, were attracted to metal, had a particular smell, etc. Thus, Franklin got the idea that electricity and lightning were the same thing. Franklin wrote his thoughts on electricity in several letters to his scientist friends, who lived in London. His scientist friends found Benjamin's observation very interesting, so in 1751, they published them in a book titled Experiments and Observations on Electricity. Benjamin decided to prove that electricity and lightning were the same. Franklin desperately needed something to get close enough to the clouds to attract lightning. His plan required something tall, like a hill or a tall building, but in Philadelphia, the U.S., they had neither a mountain nor a tall building. He came up with an idea. This one involved a key and a kite. Thus, instead of getting himself up near the lightning, he flew a kite up to it, with a metal key attached to it, to attract the lightning, and it worked. Franklin proved with this experiment that lightning and electricity were the same thing. However, even after successfully proving his hypothesis about electricity, he didn't stop. He firmly believed that the knowledge about electricity must be used for practical purposes that should help the humankind. Still, the larger question was, what could have been the practical use of the knowledge of electricity? Fire in the tall buildings, caused by lightning, was common in those days. Franklin decided to do something. Franklin knew that lightning usually hit the highest part of a building, and electrical current in lightning could start a fire. Therefore, he invented the lightning rod. It was made of metal and attached to the highest point on the house. The lightning hit the rod, instead of the house, and the electrical current from the lightning went into the ground without damaging the house. Do you know this invention has saved thousands of lives? Thus, with the help of observational skill, Benjamin contributed to humanity. 1.11 Velcro's jungle connection. One day, Georges de Mestral, a Swiss engineer, was trekking in the jungle along with his dog and observed that burdock burrs, a kind of seed, was stuck to his clothing and even his dog's fur. He tried to remove them, but it was not so easy. He examined the burrs in the microscope and realized that it's the hook-like structure that tangles with cloth or fur. He wondered whether the burrs could be made into something useful. He was so convinced with his idea of creating synthetic burrs that he continued his efforts for more than a decade, and finally, he got success and called his invention Velcro, and patented it in 1955. We use Velcro in our bags, shoes, etc. I hope you agree that this is a perfect example of curious observation. If you do not know what Velcro is, please refer to the picture below. 1.12 Alexander Fleming and his antibacterial medicine. Tuberculosis and pneumonia are bacterial diseases. Both of these deadly diseases killed millions of humans, and there was no treatment in the early 20th century. Many scientists were working on finding a solution to these bacterial diseases. Alexander Fleming was one of them, but he was in the middle of an experiment when he had to leave for some urgent work. After many days of absence from his lab, when he returned, he found it messy and began to clean some of the glass plates on which he had been growing a certain kind of bacteria. While cleaning, suddenly, he observed an odd thing. One of the plates had become contaminated by mold. Surprisingly, the area around the mold looked free of bacteria. Fleming's observation indicated that a causal relationship might exist between mold or something produced by the mold, which might prevent bacterial growth. This rather small observation of Fleming's led to a series of scientific tests that resulted in new knowledge, and finally, penicillin was invented to treat bacterial infections. Penicillin helped cure the deadly tuberculosis and pneumonia. Thus, millions of lives have been saved. I hope you agree that if creativity can be inspired by observing the environment and the situations we experience daily, the possibilities are infinite. Creativity can come at any moment in virtually any form. Having an open mind can lead to immense outcomes. In companies, the marketers, product developers, salespeople, and CEOs often observe and think about how observation can relate to their product or service. Allow yourself to dream, imagine, and create. Organizations, which are dedicated to challenging the status quo and continuously seeking creative solutions, are often the winners in today's fast-paced market. Now the question arises, why have I termed observation as an ignored skill? You might have noticed the importance of observation while going through the various anecdotes mentioned in this chapter. Tell me honestly, how many times have you tried to develop this skill? Not much of discussion happens on this topic, not many educational courses are being offered, and not many books have been written on observation skills. The simple reason behind this phenomenon is something that is very common, which is usually ignored. Now I hope you will try your best to develop observation skills through concentration and curiosity. The next chapter is about your ability to connect various independent events to understand its implications.